And so joining us now with more on the CUNY Law commencement speech and its aftermath is attorney and CEO of the International Legal Forum, Arsen Ostrovsky. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So you've heard the speech. Obviously, it's received a lot of criticism, but it's also received some support. So was this hate speech, by any legal definition?
Oh, it's pure hate speech by any kind of definition. And, you have to even go back in time before before this speech. She is someone who has quite a history of virulent, ugly anti-Semitism. As you said, she's someone who has called for the death of Israel and death of the United States. She's called for Zionists to burn in hell. Now, there is legitimate criticism, legitimate debate we can have when you're calling for death. That is pure hate speech, and quite frankly, that is incitement as well. And you really have to wonder when, this was already her track record before the commencement speech, what kind of decision-making process went into thinking of this would be an appropriate speaker, and then having selected her and having approved her speech in advance, the CUNY Law School faculty applauded when she made her remarks accusing the most vile anti-Semitic tropes, saying Zionism is racism, accusing Israel of indiscriminately murdering Palestinians, support for BDS, you name it. And they stood there, and the dean of the CUNY Law School applauded this. It's obscene and it's inexcusable.
And so the university has now released a statement condemning the graduation speech. But, only after massive backlash and threats of, let's say, defunding, calls to defund the university. And it's important to note that this isn't an isolated incident at the university. It seems that this response is perhaps too little, too late.
It's too little, too late, and quite frankly, actions speak far louder than words. And when it comes to CUNY, and specifically the CUNY Law School, it has regrettably, over the last number of years, has become a systematic breeding ground for anti-Semitism, for Jew hatred, anti-Zionism, and specifically for BDS as well. In fact, the CUNY Law School is the only law school in the United States that has formally adopted BDS as a policy. And we, the International Legal Forum, together with the National Jewish Advocacy Center, said enough is enough. We cannot sit idly by as CUNY, which is a public university, violates federal and state law, engaging in political and lobbying activities to push this relentless and systematic Jew hatred and BDS policy against Israel in violation of federal and state law.
And so what do you think should happen now? I know that the International Legal Forum is leading a campaign to hold the university accountable for this. So what can you tell us about that?
So a number of things. Our campaign here specifically, we wrote to the IRS, the Internal Revenue body in the United States, calling for CUNY's, specifically CUNY Law School's tax-exempt status to be revoked, because as a not-for-profit entity with a charitable status, you cannot engage in political or lobbying activities in the manner that CUNY has by systematically and relentlessly promoting BDS. So that's number one. Together with this, you're now also seeing a number of lawmakers who are calling for federal funds not to go to universities, specifically like CUNY, that use those federal funds to promote anti-Semitism and racism on campus as well. So I think ultimately at the end, money talks, and CUNY must understand that as a public body, as a public entity, it cannot use public funds and the public platform to promote this kind of virulent anti-Semitism and Jew hatred.
But, unfortunately, and as you mentioned, this incident isn't isolated only to CUNY. It's happening across college campuses in the United States, but you can't, necessarily go and defund all these campuses that are rife with anti-Semitism. So what does need to be done here? What can be done?
Look, there's a number of things that can be done. I think it's also important to know that this comes immediately in the wake of the White House plan on countering anti-Semitism, and this is, the CUNY case, I think specifically, is a perfect case study to test the sincerity of the plan, which was very clear also in respect to isolating anti-Semitism and Jew hatred on campus. And this is, I think, a perfect example of that to show that the White House is serious about that. But at the end of the day, universities are a special entity because they do receive federal funding So they're not like any other private institution, and so they are bound by certain federal laws and regulations which prohibit discrimination, including not only on race, but also on national origin and shared ancestry, which brings into question Zionism as well, because we see a lot of this anti-Semitism and Jew hatred on campus being masqueraded as anti-Zionism, which is one and the same. And so there are laws and there are regulations to protect Jewish students exactly from that.
Now, you mentioned the national plan to combat anti-Semitism. There's been a lot of criticism about the plan because it touches mainly on right-wing anti-Semitism, extreme right-wing anti-Semitism, and you know, the importance of Holocaust education. It barely mentions anti-Semitism from, you know, the extreme left, which is essentially what we're seeing here. Do you think that this plan will indeed be put into action now?
Well, I guess time will tell. I think it's important to also recognize, you know, the plan wasn't perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect plan, but importantly, it did reiterate that the White House does embrace the IHRA, the Holocaust Remembrance Line's definition of anti-Semitism, which is the most widely adopted and respected definition in the world, and which makes it also very clear where anti-Zionism or criticism of Israel does cross the red line, and that includes comparisons of Israelis to Nazis, denying Israel the right of self-determination, and so on. So I think it's very clear in that regard, and we need to reiterate that aspect of the plan. And I think when it comes to campuses like CUNY and like others across the United States, where we see the growing, really the surging anti-Semitism being masqueraded as anti-Zionism, that's I think where we need to call it out and really put the plan into action.
All right, Arsen Ostrovsky, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about this important issue today.
Thank you.